everyone, and welcome to another episode of Turn Left Specials. Yes, I am your host, Indiana's own Dana Black, coming to you live. Yes, live from Black Pearl Studios. I know you on lockdown. Everybody's being quarantined, but check it out. Don't listen to the orange man anymore. He blew a gasket last night. We don't have time for that. It's time to talk with people who are real leaders, who understand the importance of making sure that we take care of community. And tonight, I got a good one for you. Listen, I told you Turn Left Specials is going to be a little different. We're going to be trying to communicate with people from all over our country to share what's happening in their state, maybe even get some great ideas how we can do things differently here in Indiana, and especially when you're talking about red state Texas. So let me introduce y'all to Dr. Mary Gonzalez, who was elected state representative of House District 75, east of El Paso. She was raised in Clint, Texas, and graduated from Clint High School, and she is currently serving her fourth term as in the Texas House. Mary serves on the Appropriations Committee, the Public Education Committee, and is the vice chair of the Local and Consent Calendars Committee in the Texas House. Throughout her time as state representative, she has authored numerous bills to improve public schools, increase economic development, and support agriculture in House District 75 and throughout the state. She is currently serving her second term as vice chair for the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, a second term as secretary of the House Border Caucus, and is the chair of the newly founded, y'all know this make my heart melt, and J.D. Ford, Senator Ford, we're going to get you some help, the new Texas House LGBTQ+ Caucus. Y'all, welcome to Turn Left, House Rep, Texas State House Rep, Dr. Mary Gonzalez. Thank you for joining the show today, Miss Mary.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And just let you know, my dog is being very needy right now.
Hey, you're giving attention to somebody else, and he ain't liking it. He ain't
it's the joy of working from home, right?
Absolutely.
Like, it's just like...
Absolutely. So I had a chance to hear you speak at a Victory International conference a couple of years back, and honestly, you blew me away with the things that you were talking about that were going on in Texas. In fact, I immediately started following you after that event. And this is really kind of the first time we've actually had a chance to really talk. So tell the people who you are and where you come from.
Wow. So thank you for having me. I think that these conversations are really important. And you're right. We need to be listening to a lot of different voices and to just the same old voice every day from our president, because if that's the only voice I hear, I think I will die of despair. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mary Gonzalez. I represent the eastern part of El Paso County. I call it the micro to the macro of Texas. It has the fastest growing parts of El Paso City, which is a very large city that people don't even know about. I have the agricultural communities of El Paso County. I have 263 colonias. These are communities that don't have sewer, water, some don't have electricity, sidewalks. And then I have a state park, a Native American nation, and I border New Mexico and Mexico. I'm literally a micro to the macro. It's about nearly 200,000 people. And so I've been that state representative for about 8 years now. And it has been a journey, but you're asking who I am. I am a small town girl, Latina, queer, feminist from Texas, and I have a goat. I raise goats and horses, and have lots of dogs. And I just finished a PhD in education, so I'm a little bit of everything all in one. I'm 5 feet tall, small package with lots of energy.
You sound like somebody I can kick it with on a regular basis.
Anytime, as long as there's wine.
I got you. I'll bring the wine for you and the Tito's for me.
Okay.
So, you know what? Texas is very similar as far as a political makeup is with Indiana. We know it's a red state. And we keep hoping that one day Texas, with its diversity, will become a blue state soon. We keep hoping and wishing it's going to happen. Tell us about, the climate in Texas and why Texas still kind of struggles a little bit with becoming a blue, more purple and less red.
What I tell people all the time is we want this change to happen overnight. But we have to realize that it has been decades, generations of investment from the other side to disenfranchise, to disempower, to make people apathetic. There were intentional choices that were targeted towards our communities, Black and Brown communities. So when the people are like, well, we invested all this money, I'm like, you invested money for 2 months, and there has been literally 2 generations, 8 decades, where there have been active voter suppression, that there has been voter education that teach people how not to vote, how to teach people how not to be engaged, how to teach people how not to trust government. And I don't mean like in overt ways, but in very covert, strategic, and intentional ways. So I am very optimistic. We are going to turn a lot of these red states blue as we diversify these states, but it has to take more than relying on the diversification. It is on strategic and intentional work to overcome the messages that have been ingrained in our communities for such a long time. And so what am I seeing in our states? I'm seeing that there's a lot of consciousness raising, awareness raising, and that work is starting to pay off. But that work is exhausting.
Yeah.
But it's also a long-term project.
Absolutely. I know that here in Indiana, it's sometimes it's a little you get worn out sometimes because people don't feel like, no matter what they do, is it making a difference? And I just tell everybody, this is a citizen government. We all have to be involved. And we find.
Well, I also tell people, what's the alternative? I mean, you're right. It's exhausting. And maybe I looked back and I wrote an op-ed for NBC Latino, and I'm like, we're going to turn Texas blue. And like I said, 2018 or something. We missed that mark. But the point is, fine, we didn't make it. But what is the alternative? I don't work. I don't try to fight the injustice.
That's
I allow this to continue to seep in. I think all of us work not just for the present, but for the next generation.
Absolutely.
And so while that's exhausting, we have to keep working.
Absolutely. And that is a strong message. And I'm glad you shared that because it is not easy. We turned Indiana blue in 2008, but I know we can turn it blue in 2020. Let's talk about this crisis that we're in, right? It's COVID. We find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic. One of the things that we hear a lot in Indiana was there was that conversation of what was going on at the border with children being separated from their families, being sent to privately held orphanages and then being adopted out, families not getting reunited. Can you give us an update since we're not, COVID has taken over and nobody's talking about what's happening on the border anymore? Can you talk about how this COVID crisis is impacting what is happening on the border?
Yeah, so what we have seen in the national news over the last few days, and I'm glad it's finally coming up because it's real, is that there are health discrepancies between communities of color and COVID. Mm-hmm. So that the border crisis is not immune from what's happening with the corona crisis. In fact, they're finding themselves at very real intersections, mm-hmm. right? So let me just go back a little bit for people who may not know what's happened on the border for the last, let's say, 2 years, in a quick synopsis. My district, sadly, has been at the forefront of a lot of these immigration policies. Mm-hmm. My district was where the child processing center, where there were 700 kids in a processing center that was made for less than 100 kids, mm-hmm. were crammed in there for weeks. My district has been at the forefront of seeing what child separation looks like, because that's where we had the Tornillo tent city, where thousands of kids were in tents outside in the desert. And then my district and my community saw the consequence of anti-immigrant rhetoric in the El Paso shooting. Mm-hmm. And so let's just mm-hmm. talk about the last year and a half of trauma that the border has been experienced, and even longer, right? Because this isn't just a year and a half conversation. But you're right. Already, I remember a year and a half ago when the Tornillo tent city was up, and there were all these celebrities here, and they were all like coming in bus loads, and I got so frustrated. It's not that I didn't want them to come to my community, but I'm like, you're gonna be here for this minute, and then when it's over, when this like limelight is gone, you're not going to come back. Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. And the crisis did not end. We still have families that are being separated on the border. We still have children who are in detention centers. In fact, there's still thousands of kids in detention centers in Texas right now Um, so yes, this crisis has not gone away, and in fact, what we do know that there have been families, children, and now even border patrol agents. And I think this is a complex situation on the border, because what people don't understand about border dynamics is our economies are structured in a way where law enforcement is usually the only way for people to live.
Mm.
And that is a very intentional reality where you have people of color policing people of color, and that trauma that creates, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so what are we seeing is we are still seeing ch- families and children being detained, not given the resources necessarily from the top down, and then putting at risk children, families, and agents all at the same time in this crisis. We
Man.
know that the federal government hasn't been doing enough at all levels. It definitely isn't doing enough in this space.
Wow, and it's scary when you talk about trauma. We're talking about babies, right? Who are
Mm-hmm.
experiencing extreme trauma from this. They don't even have the comfort of their mothers. Just the simple thing that helps us out, just our mother's love. Talk about some of the reaction or the consequences. I should say, from what you're seeing with these young folks who are experiencing this trauma.
Yeah, so we know through research, and someone who loves research, that when that there is automatic trauma when children are just taken away from their parents in any situation. And so put on top of being taken away from your parents in a different country with a different language. So what we have seen is very serious cases of trauma where kids digress in their development.
Mm.
And so it's just an unfortunate situation, because here's the truth: we don't have to detain children.
Mm-mm.
Here's the other truth: the United Nations even said it is literally against international law for us to separate kids from
Mm-hmm.
families.
Mm-hmm.
And we could have a different immigration policy. In fact, we did have a different immigration policy before we had this president. And so we could change things. We could say, hey, it's inhumane to have these policies. The problem is that, and again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's worth repeating. A year and a half ago, this was a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
There were protests all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
No
Mm-hmm.
one is talking about it
Mm-mm.
still. But it's also because the administration said and kind of manipulated the public and said, hey, we're not doing child separation. Hey, we don't have families in detention. We're not doing that anymore. And the truth is, they still are.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, like, if I were just watching the news, why would I think that if the government said we're not doing it anymore, that they're still doing it? But the truth is, we are still doing it.
Absolutely, and it's something that stays on my mind because we're all about how we improve lives, and we know that there are lives that are being harmed right now, and it's something I'm always focused in on. I don't. You're right. We don't see the numbers every day. We don't see the issues every day, and that's America right now, right? We have the short attention span. We can only focus in on one thing at a time. That's why I do the show. I know that people are hunkered down and they're separating themselves and social distancing, but I don't want them to distance themselves from the political process. Speaking of politicians, your Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. He made a little noise back in March. He said
he's always making noise.
Man, look, I thought we had a bad governor, that Pence fella, but we gave him away apparently. But he suggested that our older citizens should want to volunteer to die to improve our economy. Now, I know personally you probably were like, what? What did he? How has the state of Texas, or more specifically, even your district, how have people reacted to such a notion?
So one thing I love about the border community, or Latino communities or communities of color, is that we are very multi-generational families. Like, so we are very, like, a lot of times you live with your parents, your grandparents, your kids, like multi-generationals in one household. And so I think that um, my community was like, no way. Like, I mean, even me, like, my best friend is my father, and I am taking care of
Oh.
him. Like, we are doing the stay at home. Well, we don't live together, but he lives 2 houses down from me, and I am being so careful. Like, locking him in the house, like duct taping the door, like you are not leaving. And but it's just, it's just disappointing because in this moment, what we need from elected leaders is not that to put this crisis down or like make it seem like it's not a big deal or say we're going to sacrifice people for the economy. What we need is honesty, transparency, plans, and effectiveness. And it's sad that sometimes some of our highest level leaders cannot demonstrate that in this moment. And for me, what's really sad is that the people, and here's what I always think about. How are we modeling leadership to the next generation? And it's sad that in this moment I do think there's some great leaders who are modeling good leadership,
right?
But it's not the places where we would expect it to be, right? And so so in some ways it gives me hope because there is good leadership that we can find, and it's in the trenches, about to move up and hopefully serve in greater capacities. And then in some ways it makes me sad because this is a moment where true leadership should shine through, regardless of agendas.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting that you actually called them elected leaders. I've actually been calling them elected officials who think that they're leaders. They just happen to be elected officials. They're not, because I know in our state, yesterday our governor said he wants to give it a few more days and then open up the state. Well, we don't even have proper testing to see who has what. How are you possibly going to open up the state again when we don't know who has what? Nor do we. Go ahead.
It is irresponsible to open up a state without testing. I love that you said that because I should think about that more, because I always make an argument that just because you're elected doesn't mean you know how to lead. Winning an election takes very different skills than leading. That means creating awareness, building coalitions, building consensus. These are not traits that are innate. You have to learn them and you have to practice them. I'm really lucky that I was a student organizer. And I think that being an activist while in college and in high school, I started to develop these skills little by little. And I love to use those skills that I learned now in an elected capacity. But you're right. Just because you're elected does not make you know how to be a leader.
Absolutely. I mean, because we are seeing, leadership failure at the federal level here in Indiana. We're seeing it at the state level. It was funny because today Senator Todd Young, who was one of our 2 state senators, was actually in the state. He actually came, and I was like, wait, there's a Senator Todd Young sighting. Because, we only send 2 Democrats to Washington. We only send 2. And the fact that we never see any of them, they don't hold town halls. Representative Todd, we call him Tennessee Trey. His name is Trey Hollingsworth. He's a carpetbagger. He hasn't been back to Indiana since he won. He actually did an interview and suggested that, we need to get people back to work. When he's been living off his daddy's money his entire life. He literally grew up in Tennessee, moved here, established residency a year before the election, and used his daddy's money to buy the seat. These folks who have no idea of what it is to really have to work for everything you get are trying to suggest that, forget your health, forget your safety, let's open the economy. I'm sorry, we can go back. We'll go backwards if we open up too soon. Go ahead. You were thinking something there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We have a lot to risk already. So many people have sacrificed so much. Their jobs, their security, their foundation. And if we open it up too soon, what will it mean a few weeks or months from now? Because can they go through another round of sacrificing? I don't think that's true. But I want to speak to a little bit of a structural issue that I've actually been thinking a lot about.
Okay.
One of the things that people don't know about me is I'm the oldest of 11. I come from a working class family, and I wish you could see. I kind of live in a barn because in Texas, state reps make $7,000 a year, and one of the things that I'm really concerned about is class diversity in elected positions.
Right.
Because right now, you either have to take a vow of poverty and live in a barn, or you have to come from a wealthy family, and there really is no in between,
right?
And there is no way to, and so when you don't, and I always argue that if you live that life, you're much more able to represent that reality.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's nobody who's living middle class, working class realities, then how do they speak to that voice? And I don't think it's right that we assume. I am happy to take that change in lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to take that pay cut because I'm willing to make those sacrifices. Also, because I have the privilege. I don't have a family. I don't have kids. I don't have, anybody. I don't have a partner. I just have me. I don't know if I could make those same choices of sacrifice if I had lived a different reality. And so the point of the matter is that especially if you put the lack of understanding of class diversity and class issues and how it really gets underreported and underdiscussed because it's so taboo. And then the coronavirus on top of that, there's a lot of invisible realities that are happening that aren't coming to the forefront of this conversation.
Man, that you just hit on a whole lot. I haven't even had a chance to talk about the class distinction in candidates. On our show, we interview candidates from all over the state every week. And then, like I said, we're doing extras with the Turn Left specials. And it is difficult. Even if you want to run for council, if you want to run for House rep, you have to be, in the upper middle class without a lot of out-of-pocket expenses to actually represent your community. And that's unfortunate, because how can you understand what it is to live in rural America if you've never lived in rural America? Or how can you understand what it is to struggle financially if that's not been your space? And how can you possibly create policies that positively impact those communities if you don't have an understanding? Thank you for bringing that up, because that is like huge. So
well, and I mean, and then there's these two levels, right? There's the policy making, and then there's a campaign reality, right? So I'll give you an example. It was a freak accident that I ever became a state rep, and that's a longer story for another day. But I think because it was such a surprise that I've kind of come into the elected space a little bit more fearless and a little bit more, I'm just going to say what's on my mind because it wasn't in my life plan to be a state representative.
Okay.
Well, that choice has made some people feel uncomfortable. And that uncomfort has encouraged some larger donors, again, to spend $1 million to run against me.
Wow.
Okay, well, $1 million, the state rep seat, I'm in one of the poorest districts in the state of Texas. I'm obviously not well off. And so it's just a really interesting reality to think that because I'm so outspoken in the policy world, it impacts my campaign world. That then it's just an interesting dynamic that we need to talk about as a society if we want democracy to truly be inclusive to all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, and class.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the things, again, that always excites me, especially in Indiana, because it was just 2018 that we elected our first LGBTQ plus representative to our state senate. And one of the things I always talked about was when I would visit DC for victory was Indiana needs to see what winning looks like, right? We need to understand that sometimes it's going to be hard work, but we can in the LGBTQ plus community become elected officials. And we have Senator J.D. Ford who broke that ceiling, and he is representing us. Talk about what it means to you, especially in Texas, with Senator Ted Cruz of all people, right? Senator Ted, that's the same state that guy comes from. Talk about what it means to be a Latina and LGBTQ plus representing your state.
Wow. So I got elected in 2012, and I was the first LGBT woman. There had been a gay man who got elected before in the 90s, elected in Texas. And this is a time before marriage equality was even real. So right. I remember one of the first conversations I had with an organization that had recruited me to run for office. And they're like, "We Googled you." And I'm like, "Oh no," because Google, right?
Ain't no telling what that turned up.
and they're like, "We see that you're very engaged and involved in LGBTQ community. Like, are you going to be out like when you run? Because let's be real. Well, I was the first LGBT woman elected. I was not the first LGBT woman who served. I was just the first one who was coming out and saying it. So of course, in my naivety, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be out. I had been already out for like a decade. I couldn't imagine not, like, it'd be a lie to my district. And,
Right.
I'll tell you a little bit about my district. My district, um, sadly has experienced a lot of political corruption.
Mm.
And for me, I always tell my district, I may not, we may not always agree with everything that I say and do. Um, but I'm always going to be honest, and I'm always going to be transparent, and I'm always going to be authentic. And so I think what my district really appreciated, even though it was, I mean, for those of you who don't know out there in the internet world, identify as pansexual / queer. Even though that was a very difficult conversation to have with a lot of people at the doors, because they're like, what is pansexual? What are you talking about? In 2012, which seems like it wasn't that long ago, but the world viewed LGBTness so different back then.
Absolutely.
And
it was different even when I ran in 2016. I had locks then, but I usually stayed in a tie. I usually, I'm definitely a cross-dressing woman, and people were like, "Are you really gonna do this?" And I was running in against the Speaker of the House, who had been in his seat for 30 years, which was, it wasn't a very diverse community at all. And they were like, you're doing what, Dana Black? And I was like, I gotta be myself. That's just it.
And because, again, for the next generation, we have to model it authenticity. It's the most important thing we can do. We do not model authenticity enough, especially in a world where it's a lot of like filters and social media that isn't accurate. Like, right. We have to, if we want the world to be authentic, then we have to model it.
Absolutely.
And so anyways, what was it like? It was hard.
Yeah.
And it's still hard, but I will say, and I'm looking forward for Indiana in this regard. I was the first, but the next session there was another, and now there's 5.
Wow.
And here's what's really powerful. We did start the first caucus. The caucus has 41 members.
Wow.
And I know, that is just what 41 members of the legislature and the Texas House. And that is, if you would have told me in 2012 this was going to be the reality, I would have never believed you.
Man, and it's so wonderful. I was responded to a post earlier today that talked about how millennials were a little discouraged because they felt like the progress wasn't fast enough. And I'd kind of, the only argument I had was that sometimes progress takes more than a lifetime, right? It took 300 years to get rid of, slavery. It took 70 plus years for women to get the right to vote. And that was just white women. We didn't talk about women of color, right? Native Americans, the Hispanic community. And so sometimes change takes time. But when the ball starts rolling, so you can't stop it, because people become more aware and they become more comfortable, and you realize, oh, these are just humans too. They want, everything for their kids. They want to live a decent life. They want to make sure that the future is bright for everyone. And speaking of the future, and I'm switching gears real quick because I want to hit this. You said you earned your doctorate degree in education. We know that sometimes Texas has some interesting textbooks that they want to put out. And I did mention I was going to talk about this, but you kind of triggered it. Talk about your passion for public education and making sure that the history is told right.
Oh my gosh. So a little story. So I grew up in a little town called Clint, population 982 people. And I would tell my dad, all I want to do is change the world. Okay. And my dad would say, okay, mija, you want to change the world, then you need to get involved in politics. And I said, okay, Dad. So I graduated from Clint. I went to UT Austin, which is the capital of Texas, and I started working at the Capitol. And I worked for 3 legislators, and guess what happened? I hated politics. I felt that it moved too slowly. I was like, I thought it played political football in people's lives. I'm like, what is this? So then I went to my advisor and I said, I came all the way from Clint, Texas to Austin, which is 9 hours away. Texas is big.
Yes, Lord.
And I came all the way because I want to change the world. She asked me 2 questions that have stayed with me forever. The first question was, well, what about the world do you want to change? And the second question is, what really changes the world? So I went home and I thought about it, and I came back. And the first question, I had the answer. I was like, well, I want to change the world by every day tackling racism and sexism and heterosexism and classism and genderism and ableism and anti-Semitism and all the isms in a really intersectional way. And then I said, and the way I think I can change the world is because I was looking around the world, who's doing this? And it was my advisors, my professors, my teachers who had created a consciousness that was making me understand that I could be an agent of change.
Yeah.
So it's like, I want to be a professor. I want to be in education, because that is where I felt I could start to plant those seeds of awareness. So that's why I became really passionate. And then and you're right. And then I became very aware of what our textbooks are saying. I mean, we had this stupid rule that said that Texas couldn't have pictures of women with briefcases because it would send the wrong messages. Or even right now, we have a rule where you can't use the word capitalist. I mean, just like if you looked at some of these rules, textbook, it would just blow your mind. Like, I will say, it's kind of a weird dynamic because we have these weird rules, but at the same time, we're also progressing and creating culturally based curriculum. So we're creating Mexican American studies courses, African American studies courses. We're not to LGBTQ studies courses, but at least we see that. So it's a really weird dynamic. But it's sad in Texas sometimes because we're an interesting dichotomy of moving forward and still really stuck behind in some ways. And here's what I will say. I go talk to lots of classes, and I ask them 5 questions. And the first question is tell me who the governor is of Texas. And most young people stay silent. They're like, maybe Rick Perry, and it's not Rick Perry. He was governor a long time ago. But then they say, okay, maybe 1 or 2 will say Greg Abbott. But most students, I'm talking high school and university level classes. The second question I ask, I know, it's okay. The second question I ask is, who is the lieutenant governor? And I'm glad you brought him up. And they're silent. They're like, I have no idea who the lieutenant governor is. The third question I ask is, who is the most politically powerful person in the state of Texas? And they're like, I don't know. And I share my opinion that I think is the lieutenant governor. The fourth question I ask is something fun. Like, okay, all right, well, let's go back to some fun stuff. Who are the Cowboys playing this weekend? Or who is the leading star of whatever movie? I don't even know. But I pick a pop culture question and everyone raises their hands. And then I stop and I say, look, it is clear that you have the capability and ability to know names and information. Mm-hmm. So why do you know this name and you don't know this name? Is it intentional or unintentional? Mm-hmm. And I think that the state and our country has done a lot of work, and intentional in many ways, to not have people understand or know the structures and systems that are in place. Because if you don't know who's in charge, then how are you going to change it?
See. Oh, you've been repeating all of my posts from the last couple of weeks because my brain has been ready to explode, because one of the arguments I've been saying is, how do you make the changes that you want if you don't actually change the person who's in charge of everything? And you've got to do that.
But if you don't know, right?
Exactly.
If you don't know, and so back to education, my big thing is we have to do more to create a critical consciousness, right?
Critical consciousness.
There is an assumption. Now I'm going to sound a little conspiracy theory, but I'm not. Schools can exist to create social justice and equity, but they can also exist to maintain the status quo. Yeah. So we have to be really careful that we are pushing education to break the barriers that have always existed, because education is not immune from oppression.
Right. Absolutely. Wow. That is some powerful stuff you spitting over here. I'm sure my Hoosier listeners are like, how come she don't live in Indiana? We need her right here. We could definitely use some of that moxie right here in the state of Indiana. You are amazing, and you were amazing. Like I said, when I heard you a couple years ago, thank you so much for joining us. Now, you're on the ballot this year, right?
I just won my re-election, my primary, so we're good.
Okay.
Thank the Lord. Like, oh my gosh, like.
Well, congratulations.
I couldn't do it. These elections get intense.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? Because you're trying to convince people. It's your job interview, right? Because you want to represent the people. And I have often, especially women who are thinking about running for office and they aren't really sure if they should. I tell them all the time, if you just running to put your face on a poster because you think you're cute because you moved to the side, we got real work to do. And we need real thinkers and real leaders and real forward movers to get Indiana out of 1953. Because we stuck.
And you're right. And here's the thing. You may not win, but at least it's a rocking chair theory. I was like, there's no way I'm going to win. There's no way. But I did know that if I was sitting in a rocking chair at 80 years old, that I would look back and be like, damn, I should have just tried.
Absolutely.
And I people who even lost, I feel like they were like, I'm glad I did it because it taught people so much about themselves.
Absolutely. I lost my first and only race, and it wasn't even close, right? It wasn't even close. But from that, I became the deputy chair for engagement for our state party. I represent the Indiana Stonewall, which is our LGBTQ plus caucus. I created a platform and a voice, and now I do interviews with other candidates who are running for office all over the state. And I remind people, sometimes a loss is a win. Even though I didn't get a chance to get rid of Brian, that guy that I was running against, and he ended up winning 2 more times, we now have cultivated a culture of, I can do this too. If Dana did it, being her authentic self, then I can do it too. And I tell you what, Doctor, you have really, I'm inspired. I'm inspired listening to you, and I thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I know that a lot of people are like, well, what can I tell people in Indiana? We need to see what success looks like. And you represent success for us, and hopefully we can mimic what you guys are doing in Texas. And if you ever need anything from any Hoosiers, you let us know, because I'm certain we'll be more than happy to help you out in the Lone Star State.
And if you need anything, I'll be there too. I mean, I got Southwest Points. I can be there in a heartbeat.
Oh, don't play, because Stonewall always has fundraisers. Because
well, I'm down.
I'm what's
so
up.
down.
That's what y'all market. The next time we are able to get back together, we're going to see if we can book Dr. Mary Gonzalez to come and speak to our Stonewall group, raise money. What we do with our money with Stonewall is we donate to LGBTQ plus candidates and our allies who are speaking for us, and hopefully help get some seats flipped. So I'm gonna hold you to it. So now I follow you on Twitter, and I'll be sending you another message when we can get a date squared away. Hey, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and enjoy your doggy and all the goats and animals and chickens. I'm a city girl. I'll stay at the hotel when I come down there to visit. All right, hey, y'all. Indiana's own Dana Black coming to you with Turn Left specials, where we are talking to leaders, not just elected officials, leaders from across the country. Dr. Mary Gonzalez, representing the state of Texas, District 74. Y'all, I'll see y'all tomorrow night. I got a new candidate coming on. He's running out of Kokomo in District 30, House District 30. I know you'll like him. It'll be a great conversation, so I'll see you guys tomorrow night. Peace.